conspiracy theories, and as I mentioned in, I believe it was my sort of beginning of year channel ramble update video, I said that we were going to be recovering some topics that we've already done way back, and this is the first of those. So as you can tell, today we're going to be addressing the question, who shot JFK? I did a video on this ages ago. It's got to be a good 2 years ago, but it this way, that the thumbnail, I'll put it on screen for your viewing pleasure, but the thumbnail makes it makes me cringe. I know everything's like great with hindsight, but like, my hair is all over the place. In my defence, it might have been during COVID, to be fair, and the beard is unlike shaped. It's like bushy. I look homeless, for want of a better term. I haven't got my glasses on. I think it was in the very early days of the channel, and yeah, but basically it's time for an updated version, and I think that video is only 20 minutes long, so we're gonna do it again. We're gonna talk about the assassination of JFK, and we're gonna talk about the various theories, who shot him and whatnot, because it is probably one of the most hotly contested conspiracy theories out there. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. So we're gonna begin this video by not diving straight in with the conspiracy theories, but instead giving you an overview of the events that happened on November 22nd, 1963. So we'll give a little bit of context, the facts we have, and a wee bit of the aftermath as well before we dive into those kooky theories. Not kooky. So, November 22nd, 1963, death of the President. Shortly after noon on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated as he rode in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza in downtown Dallas, Texas. By the fall of 1963, President John F. Kennedy and his political advisors were preparing for the next presidential campaign. Although they had not formally announced his candidacy, it was clear that President Kennedy was going to run, and he seemed confident about his chances of re-election. At the end of September, the president travelled west, speaking in 9 different states in less than a week. The trip was meant to put a spotlight on natural resources and conservation efforts. But JFK also used it to sound out themes such as education, national security, and world peace for his run in 1964. So a month later, the president addressed Democratic gatherings in Boston and Philadelphia. Then, on November 12th, he held the first important political planning session for the upcoming election year. At the meeting, JFK stressed the importance of winning Florida and Texas, and talked about his plans to visit both states in the next 2 weeks. Mrs. Kennedy would accompany him on the swing through Texas, which would be her first extended public appearance since the loss of their baby Patrick in August. On November 21st, the President and First Lady departed on Air Force One for the 2-day 5-city tour of Texas. President Kennedy was aware that a feud among party leaders in Texas could jeopardize his chances of carrying the state in 1964, and one of his aims for the trip was to bring Democrats together. He also knew that a relatively small but vocal group of extremists was contributing to the political tensions in Texas, and would likely make its presence felt, particularly in Dallas, where US Ambassador to the United Nations Adlai Stevenson had been physically attacked a month earlier after making a speech there. Nonetheless, JFK seemed to relish the prospect of leaving Washington, getting out among the people and into the political fray. The first stop was San Antonio. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Governor John B. Canale, and Senator Ralph W. Yarborough led the welcoming party. They accompanied the President to Brooks Air Force Base for the dedication of the Aerospace Medical Health Center. Continuing on to Houston, he addressed the League of United Latin American Citizens and spoke at a testimonial dinner for Congressman Albert Thomas, before ending the day in Fort Worth. A light rain was falling on Friday morning, November 22nd, but a crowd of several thousand stood in the parking lot outside the Texas hotel where the Kennedys had spent the night. A platform was set up and the President, wearing no protection against the weather, came out to make some brief remarks. "There are no faint hearts in Fort Worth," he began, "and I appreciate you being here this morning. Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself. It takes longer, but of course she looks better than we do when she does it." He went on to talk about the nation's need for being second to none in defense and in space, for continued growth in the economy and the willingness of citizens of the United States to assume the burdens of leadership. The warmth of the audience response was palpable as the President reached out to shake hands amidst a sea of smiling faces. Back inside the hotel, the President spoke at a breakfast of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, focusing on military preparedness. "We are still the keystone in the Arch of Freedom," he said. "We will continue to do our duty, and the people of Texas will be in the lead." The presidential party left the hotel and went by motorcade to Carswell Air Force Base for the 13-minute flight to Dallas. Arriving at Love Field, President and Mrs. Kennedy disembarked and immediately walked toward a fence where a crowd of well-wishers had gathered, and they spent several minutes shaking hands. The First Lady received a bouquet of red roses which she brought with her to the waiting limousine. Governor John Canale and his wife Nellie were already seated in the open convertible as the Kennedys entered and sat behind them. Since it was no longer raining, the plastic bubble top had been left off. Vice President and Mrs. Johnson occupied another car in the motorcade. The procession left the airport and travelled along a 10-mile route that wound through downtown Dallas on the way to the Trade Mart, where the President was scheduled to speak at a luncheon. Crowds of excited people lined the streets and waved to the Kennedys. The car turned off Main Street at Dealey Plaza around 12:30 p.m. As it was passing the Texas School Book Depository, gunfire suddenly reverberated around the plaza. Bullets struck the President's neck and head, and he slumped over toward Mrs. Kennedy. The governor was shot in his back. The car sped off to Parkland Memorial Hospital just a few minutes away, but little could be done for the President. A Catholic priest was summoned to administer the last rites, and at 1 p.m. John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. Though seriously wounded, Governor Canale would recover. The President's body was brought to Love Field and placed on Air Force One. Before the plane took off, a grim-faced Lyndon B. Johnson stood in the tight, crowded compartment and took the oath of office, administered by U.S. District Court Judge Sarah Hughes. The brief ceremony took place at 2:38 p.m. Less than an hour earlier, police had arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, a recently hired employee at the Texas School Book Depository. He was being held for the assassination of President Kennedy and the fatal shooting shortly afterward of Patrolman J.D. Tippit on a Dallas street. On Sunday morning, November 24th, Oswald was scheduled to be transferred from police headquarters to the county jail. The viewers across America watching the live television coverage suddenly saw a man aim a pistol and fire at point-blank range. The assailant was identified as Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner. Oswald died 2 hours later at Parkland Hospital. That same day, President Kennedy's flag-draped casket was moved from the White House to the Capitol on a caisson drawn by 6 grey horses, accompanied by 1 riderless black horse. At Mrs. Kennedy's request, the cortege and other ceremonial details were modelled on the funeral of Abraham Lincoln. Crowds lined Pennsylvania Avenue, and many wept openly as they passed. During the 21 hours that the president's body lay in state in the Capitol Rotunda, about 250,000 people filed by to pay their respects. On Monday, November 25th, 1963, President Kennedy was laid to rest in Arlington National Cemetery. The funeral was attended by heads of state and representatives from more than 100 countries, with untold millions more watching on television. Afterward at the gravesite, Mrs. Kennedy and her husband's brothers, Robert and Edward, lit an eternal flame. Perhaps the most indelible images of the day were the salute to his father, given by little John F. Kennedy Jr., daughter Caroline kneeling next to her mother at the president's bier, and the extraordinary grace and dignity shown by Jacqueline Kennedy. As people throughout the nation and the world struggled to make sense of a senseless act and to articulate their feelings about President Kennedy's life and legacy, many recalled these words from his inaugural address. He said, "All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin." So in terms of aftermath, on November 29th, 1963, President Lyndon B. Johnson appointed the President's Commission on the Assassination of President Kennedy. It came to be known as the Warren Commission, after its chairman, Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the United States. President Johnson directed the commission to evaluate matters relating to the assassination and the subsequent killing of the alleged assassin, and to report its findings and conclusions to him. The U.S. House of Representatives established the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1976 to reopen the investigation of the assassination in light of allegations that previous inquiries had not received the full cooperation of federal agencies. The committee, which also investigated the death of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., issued its report on March 29, 1979. So, in terms of summary of the findings and recommendations, the committee basically said, the committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that President John F. Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. The committee is unable to identify the other gunman or the extent of the conspiracy. The committee believes that the Soviet government was not involved. The committee believes that the Cuban government was not involved. The committee believes that anti-Castro Cuban groups, as groups, were not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, but that the available evidence does not preclude the possibility that individual members could have been involved. The committee believes, on the basis of the evidence available to it, that the National Syndicate of Organized Crime as a group was not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, but that the available evidence does not preclude the possibility that individual members may have been involved. The Secret Service, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Central Intelligence Agency were not involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. So basically, they didn't know who had ordered it or orchestrated it, but they left it open that it could have been anti-Castro Cuban groups, as well as the mob, essentially, is essentially what they were saying. But not everybody would take these findings as fact, or take them without putting up a fight, basically. So those who questioned the findings of the Warren Commission and began positing alternative theories spawned a cottage industry of books, documentaries, and later websites that continue to thrive in the 21st century. Among the first books to challenge the Warren Report were Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment, a critique of the Warren Commission's inquiry into the murders of President John F. Kennedy, and Lee Harvey Oswald in 1966, and Edward and J. Epstein's Inquest, the Warren Commission and the Establishment of Truth. Cuba is central to a number of conspiracy theories. One theory, that the Cuban government was responsible, gathered steam after the Senate Select Committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities revealed that the CIA had made several attempts to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. In denying the allegations, Castro argued that such an action would have posed too great a risk of retaliation by the United States. This line of thought finds great significance in a trip that Oswald made in late September 1963 to Mexico City, where he remained until early October and made repeated attempts to contact the Cuban and Soviet consulates. At the other end of the Cuban political conspiracy spectrum were theories that attempted to tie the assassination and Oswald to anti-Castro groups who were angry at Kennedy for his decision to withhold US military support for the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy's lack of support for the invasion is also cited as a motive by those who hold that vindictive elements within the CIA were behind the assassination. These theories emphasize Oswald's efforts on behalf of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans in April to August 1963, and his encounters with individuals from both pro and anti-Castro groups. Cuba is also on the margins of the theories that blame the assassination on organized crime, tangentially connected because of the CIA's efforts to recruit the mafia through Chicago syndicate boss Sam Giancana to help kill Castro, whose revolution had ousted organized crime from Cuba. More central to the motive proposed for the mob wanting to kill President Kennedy were the aggressive efforts by his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, to investigate and eradicate organized crime. Ruby also figures into some of these theories because of his connection with organized crime as a result of his involvement with gambling. One of the most developed theories was pushed by Jim Garrison, the district attorney of New Orleans, who alleged that anti-Castro and anti-communist elements within the CIA were behind a conspiracy that involved Oswald and a coterie of rabid New Orleans anti-communists. Businessman Clay Shaw, private detective and former FBI agent Guy Bannister, and David Ferry, who had been in the same Civil Air Patrol squadron as Oswald in the 1950s. Bannister and Ferry died before Garrison brought his case to trial, but Shaw was found not guilty in 1969. The book Garrison later wrote about his pursuit, On the Trail of the Assassins, My investigation and prosecution of the murder of President Kennedy, written in 1988, was a touchstone for Oliver Stone's movie JFK in 1991. Yet another theory put Johnson at the centre of a plot to kill Kennedy to clear his own path to presidency. Evidence for this theory was supposedly provided by a statement by convicted Watergate conspirator and former CIA agent E. Howard Hunt, who claimed that Johnson had ordered CIA agents to kill Kennedy. So, subsequent congressional responses, while still frames from the Zapruder's 8mm footage had been published in November 1963 in Life, the footage itself did not receive a wide viewing until 1975, when it was shown on the Goodnight America television program. In showing Kennedy's head jerking backward, the film seemed to indicate that a shot had come from in front of the president and not from Oswald's sniping nest, adding seeming support to those who argued that there had been a second shooter on Dealey Plaza's grassy knoll. The uproar generated by the American public's response to the film, and by the revelations that the CIA had withheld pertinent information from the Warren Commission, contributed to the establishment in 1976 of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, or HSCA, which investigated not only the assassination of Kennedy, but also that of Martin Luther King Jr. Although the HSCA's findings were largely in line with those of the Warren Commission, including the conclusion that a shot by Oswald had killed the president, and that a single bullet had hit both Kennedy and Connolly, its bombshell revelation was a dictabelt audio recording made from a Dallas motorcycle policeman's microphone that was said to provide evidence of 4 shots. That is, 3 by Oswald and a 4th by another shooter. That 4th shot, a miss, was thought to have come from the grassy knoll. As a result of this acoustic evidence, the HSCA concluded that there had been 2 shooters, and that the assassination was likely the product of a conspiracy. The committee also concluded that neither any US security or intelligence agencies, nor the government of Cuba or the Soviet Union had been involved. That's what we went over earlier. It did not rule out the involvement of organised crime or anti-Castro groups, but it couldn't prove it. Not long after the committee published its report, however, the reliability of the acoustic evidence and the conclusions drawn from it came under broad criticism, greatly undermining the HSCA's assertion that there had been a conspiracy. The release and popularity of Stone's JFK in 1991 sparked a new round of conspiracy speculation, to which Congress responded with the passage of the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 and the creation of the Assassination Records Review Board. From 1994 to 1998, this independent board reviewed, declassified and made available millions of pages of previously sealed or secret documents from the Warren Commission, the HSCA, the FBI, the CIA, and scores of other governmental organisations. The board also conducted some new interviews. The Act required that the US National Archives and Records Administration, or NARA, released all of the related documents within 25 years. As the October 26, 2017 deadline for the release of the remaining undisclosed documents approached, US President Donald Trump effusively anticipated the disclosure. At the 11th hour, however, the White House was inundated with requests from the CIA and the FBI to redact several hundred documents in the interest of national security. It was thought that some of the intelligence agency's concerns related to fears that the remaining documents included the identities of US intelligence sources who might still be living and at risk of retaliation. After some hesitancy, Trump complied with the agency's requests, placing some 300 files under further classified review, which was to be completed within 6 months, but authorizing the release of nearly 2,900 other unseen documents. In so doing, Trump advised the intelligence agencies to be extremely circumspect in any request for further delays, noting that the need for continued protection can only have grown weaker with the passage of time. Historians were dubious that any of the newly released documents would provide conclusive evidence for any of the conspiracy theories. Some pundits cautioned against cherry-picking supportive information. Among the documents released were a minutely detailed account of Oswald's trip to Mexico City and memos from high-level intelligence officials, including one in which FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover bemoans the Dallas Police Department's failure to heed FBI warnings of the need to protect Oswald during his fatal transfer from the Dallas Police Jail. Another Hoover memo describes the Soviet government's response to the assassination and the KGB's conviction that Johnson was involved. As the April 2018 deadline for the re-evaluation of the files that had been held back drew near, NARA released additional batches of documents, some which had never been seen. Most of the documents released, however, already had been made public, but were re-released with fewer redactions. In all, during 2017, NARA released nearly 35,000 documents related to the Kennedy assassination, including some 16,000 that were released in full. On April 26, 2018, the Trump administration surprised many observers by announcing a 3-year extension of the deadline for the release of some documents, which it had deemed needing to remain confidential because of identifiable national security, law enforcement, and foreign affairs concerns. The new deadline for the further release of documents was set for October 26, 2021. Oh mad, so I don't know if we would have covered this information in the first time I did this. But anyways, in October 2021, as a result of delays caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and in response to security agency requests that the release of certain documents continue to be prolonged, Trump's successor, President Joe Biden, postponed the release of additional documents and announced that they would be provided in 2 batches. The first batch would come on December 15, 2021, and the second by December 15, 2022. After an intensive 1-year review, the tranche released in December 2021 consisted of 1,491 documents, most of which, again, had been published earlier with more redactions. Once more, there were no bombshells, though new light was shed on Oswald's overtures to the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City during the period before the assassination, and on his attempt to secure a travel visa to Cuba, where he then would have ostensibly waited to obtain a visa for the USSR. The release in December 2022 was made up of 13,173 documents, many of which came from the CIA, including a number of Oswald's movements and contacts. Documents revealed that in December 1960, nearly 3 years before the Kennedy assassination, that the government had opened a file on Oswald following his failed defense connection to the USSR in 1959. Released documents also indicated that the CIA initially was concerned that Ruby and Oswald had been connected before their fateful encounter, but it was determined that they did not know each other. This release of documents meant that about 95% of the CIA's records relating to the assassination had been made available to the public. Biden directed the National Archives and security agencies to conduct a 6-month review of the remaining documents. By June 30th, 2023, when 1,103 documents were released, more than 2,600 additional documents had been released. Some 99% of documents in the collection were now available to the public. The intelligence agencies and archives then established transparency plans for the release of the remaining redactions and documents, which according to the New York Times is about 4,684 docs. As the reasons for their classification became no longer applicable, a number of observers believe that the most important revelation of the June 30th release was the disclosure of the name of the agent who had been tasked with overseeing Oswald's correspondence, Reuben Ephron. All of the attempts to make previously classified information public were taken in the belief that removing the government's veil of secrecy from the assassination would help bring closure. However, decades after the event and the investigations, speculation continues and conspiracy theories still abound. So, final witness. Indeed, later in 2023, new doubt was cast on the Warren Commission's conclusions with the publication of The Final Witness. A Kennedy Secret Service agent breaks his silence after 60 years. A book by Paul Landis, one of the Secret Service agents assigned to protect the First Lady on that fateful day. Landis, who had been riding on the bumper of the car that was following the presidential limousine, was traumatized by the event and left the Secret Service only months after Kennedy's death. In 2014, having spent most of his life trying to forget the assassination, he read a book about it and came to believe that he held pieces of key information that had never come to light because he kept them a secret. The Warren Commission's conclusions were partly based on the discovery of the magic bullet on the stretcher that had borne Connolly in Parkland Memorial Hospital. 6 decades later, Landis claimed that after the First Lady left the limousine at the hospital, he found the bullet resting on the top of the back of the seat of the car, and seeking to prevent it from falling into the hands of a scavenger, put it in his pocket, brought it into the hospital, and without telling anyone, put it on the president's stretcher, irrationally thinking that would be the best place for investigators to find it. How the bullet had then been transferred to Connolly's stretcher is uncertain. His account, the centerpiece of The Final Witness, was dismissed by skeptics who focused on Landis's failure to report these actions at the time. But for those who found it credible, well, the revelation suggested that the bullet in question had struck Kennedy in the back and then became dislodged, rather than penetrating his neck and hitting Connolly. If this is true, some argued, this interpretation indicated that Connolly would have to have been hit by another bullet, once again raising the possibility of a second shooter. And that is that. I'll be completely honest, I wanted to redo this video completely without the knowledge that loads of those documents just so happened to get released last year, so that was very cool. I feel like surely that's that. If there truly aren't, if truly all of the documents have been released, then what more information is there to come, really? I think realistically I don't know, it is a bit of a tricky one because you ultimately, like the Warren Commission stated, any one of those suspicious groups could have had an influence. It could have been one of them, it could have been a collection of multiple of them, or it could have just been some like rogue vigilantes who operated, within the beliefs of said groups. But I don't think we'll ever 100% know, but my gut says I doubt it's this massive conspiracy. I'd love to believe that it was Lyndon Johnson fighting for presidency, but realistically, Kennedy was pretty outspoken in his policies and whatnot, and I think just some crazy vigilante or a very, very small group of people decided it was time to terminate him, basically. But let me know what you think. It's definitely a super interesting one, and to be honest, I think it's probably a conspiracy theory that's never ever gonna die, even when 100% of the documents are out. I just think people won't let it go simply because of the magnitude of it, and I pray something like this never happens again, but yeah, I just think because of how literally how crazy it is, the conspiracy theorists and theories, they will never stop, I don't think. But definitely do let me know what you think, because it's certainly interesting. But my friends, that is going to do it for this evening's video. I think we're sitting at around 40 minutes ish, so a bit more of a detailed look, and hopefully you if you weren't too clued up on this topic, you're a little bit more clued up now. We have so many big conspiracy theories to go through. What have we got? The one I want to do next is the moon landing fake, because I've said it on the channel and I'll say it again, if I'm gonna believe a conspiracy theory, it's that one. And I know the majority of evidence is being debunked, but we will address the question, was the moon landing fake? The 1969 one, that is. And I want to do like an hour plus long video, like probably looking at all the evidence and then all the evidence against, and have a little bit of back and forth. I want to do the same with, is the earth flat? I want to find a really good flat earther website or documentary and react to it and whatnot. We've got how the pyramids built, really dig into that, the whole aliens thing. Area 51, have I redone an Area 51 one? I did Bob Lazar recently, but I feel like we could probably do what really is in Area 51, as a question. We've got plenty of nice updated conspiracy theories with hopefully more pictures and stuff going on for you to enjoy. But yeah, that is going to do it for this evening's video. I really hope you did enjoy it. If you did, as always, if you could give this video a like, it really means a lot. And if you're new to the channel, then consider subscribing.